Today we are going to be reading about these two different accounts about the same thing that occurred. While we read these two different accounts, we're going to think about different point of views, and we're going to think about what people are observing when they're observing the same thing and what they're thinking about what they observe. So point of view means how you see something. It can be literal, like if you see a tree, it's a tree, or it can be figurative, where you see something based on your feeling. If you see a puppy and you love puppies, you see something happy and joyous. But if you hate puppies, then you might not see something happy and joyful. So point of view is how you see it as a person. And when we read these different accounts, they might be different based on the person that is seeing what is happening. When we look at this project, we are going to read the two parts. There are going to be times in this video where we stop and share. During that time, you need to turn to your partner in a level 1 whisper and tell them the answer. Then look back at the screen or at your book so we can continue. I will not be able to write complete sentences here, but you are required to write complete sentences when you fill out your organizer. Okay, let's get started. So we're going to start by unraveling. The first part we unravel is the two titles. Zebulon Pike, The Source of the Mississippi by George Chester. And the second one is The Journal of Zebulon Pike. So I now predict what I've underlined, and when I see Zebulon Pike, The Source of the Mississippi, source reminds me of information, and so it might be something that's real and non-fiction, not fake. And when I see The Journal of Zebulon Pike, I think of something that is possibly an account that someone is telling. And oftentimes when you see a journal, it's like a conversation someone's having with what they're writing. So they're talking through their thoughts, and there might be slang conversation or conversation that's natural to them, but not always correct grammar. The next part is run through and number. So we have 3 paragraphs in the first passage, and we have 4 paragraphs in the second passage. Next part of unravel is A, are you reading the questions? Are the important words circled? So looking at the story, we do not have any illustrations or captions. We do have one closed reading box, and that says, when you reread the account, underline phrases in a sentence that show point of view each author expresses about Pike's expedition. Next is A, are you reading the questions? Question number 1. Complete this point of view organizer by identifying the topic of the account, then list details that describe the point of view of each author expresses. How do the author's conclusions differ? So I think this is important. How do they differ? That means how are they different? List details. There's an S on details, so that means more than one. And point of view, which what we just talked about, means how they see it. So we're going to figure out how they see this story is different and use details to support that. All right, now it is V, venture through the passage. Zebulon and the Source of the Mississippi by George Chester. In August 1805, Zebulon Pike and a group of men left St. Louis, Missouri to explore the little-known Mississippi River. Their mission, find the river's source, which is where it begins. Pike and his men traveled north along what would become the borders of Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. A pleasant autumn gave way to a brutal winter, and Pike and his men suffered horribly. But on February 1st, the expedition reached Lake Sang Sue, also called Leech Lake. believing he had found the source of the Mississippi, an exhausted and overjoyed Pike claimed victory. I'd like you to turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor, based on the facts they give us, did he actually find victory? Yes or no? All right, I hope most of you said no. That word, believed he had found victory, leads us to think that maybe he didn't actually find victory because it says believed instead of did. Continuing on paragraph 3. But the truth is that Pike had failed. Later explorers discovered that the Mississippi's true source is Lake Itasca, roughly 25 miles west of Leech Lake. Pike's expedition was a disaster, a brutal 2,000-mile trip made in ice and snow for nothing. So go ahead now and talk with your neighbor and tell your neighbor what sentence in paragraph 3 tells you the true outcome of their mission. Go. Okay, so right here where it says Pike's expedition was a disaster, that shows us the true outcome of their mission. It said a brutal 2,000 trip made on ice and snow for nothing. So this story tells us that the source of the Mississippi River mission was a disaster. The trip was made in snow and ice for nothing. And though the men believed they had victory, they actually failed in their attempt. All right. From the Journals of Zebulon Pike. Go ahead now and tell your neighbor in 30 seconds, what do you think will be different based on the little we know about this being a journal article? Go. All right, so I hope that most of you said this will be different because it's a journal article and this is told through a real person's point of view. And this might be different because it's how the person experienced it when he was going through it. We're going to begin reading now. Please put your finger on the first paragraph. From the Journals of Zebulon Pike. January 7th, 1806. Made but 11 miles, and then were obligated to send ahead and make fires every 3 miles, notwithstanding which the cold was so intense that some of the men had their noses, others their fingers, and others their toes frozen, before they felt the cold sensibly. Very severe day's march. July 12th, 1806. January 12th. Went out and met my men. A tree had fallen on one of them and hurt them very much. January 13th, 1806. After encountering much difficulty, we arrived on Lake DeSable a little before night, the ice being very bad on the Lake River. One sled fell through. February 1st, 1806. Left our camp pretty early and arrived at Lake Sang Sue at 2:30. I will not attempt to describe my feelings on the accomplishment of my voyage, for this is the main source of the Mississippi. Okay, go ahead now with 2 minutes with the person next to you. Find 3 sentences that tell us the point of view of this person, Zebulon Pike, and his mission to find the source of the Mississippi. Go. All right, so looking at paragraph 1, it says, a very severe day's march. Severe is a serious and mostly bad feeling. So when it says a very severe day's march, his point of view here is saying that it was a long, hard traveling day. Next, in paragraph 3, it says, January 13th, 1806, after encountering much difficulty, we arrived on a lake. This is a special point of view that we did not get to read in the first excerpt about the Zebulon Pike. This person is describing that they had great difficulty, even said that the ice being very bad, a sled fell through. That's a very personal perspective that we only could have learned if the person was actually there. Next, paragraph 4. It said, arrived at Lake Sangsu. And then it said, I will not attempt to discuss my feelings of the accomplishment of our voyage. So them saying, I will not attempt to describe, they are so happy and so excited that they can't even describe their accomplishments. So that is a very unique perspective on that, because Zebulon Pike, from his eyes, he's seeing his trip as a huge success. Was it a huge success in reality? I hope you just thought to yourself, no, because it wasn't. But through his eyes and through his point of view, he describes a great accomplishment. All right, moving on to our graphic organizer. I want us to fill this in together. I am going to say some of the details, but we have several of them underlined, while you will write exact sentences and details to describe using that evidence. That's very important. So the main topic of this text was, of course, about the Zebulon Pike expedition of the Mississippi River. So please write incomplete sentences, but your sentences should look something like Zebulon's Pike exploration of the Mississippi River. Again, the topic is about Zebulon Pike's exploration of the Mississippi River. Next, we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 details about what happened through a second-hand source, just explaining the raw details of the trip. Over here, we should also have 5 details about the trip that's only personal to a first-person point of view. So in your first box, details about George Chester's point of view, this should be facts and details about the trip. When you fill in your details about the journal article, you should include details that are only able to know through his eyes. So those would be details of feeling, loss, suffering, that if you were reading about it in history, you might not know. But if you were there in person, you would have seen for yourself. Please take 10 minutes to fill in this chart, 5 details for each. When you're done, please raise your hand to show the teacher, and then you can move on to numbers 2, and your homework will be number 3. Thanks.